Scarlett's words hit me like incoming artillery as she stood in my son's kitchen, her wedding dress hanging pristine behind her. "The best gift would be if you disappeared from our family." She smiled, that plastic smile I'd grown to hate over the past 3 years. Preston nodded in agreement, not even bothering to look at me. "My name is Spencer Garrett. I'm 63 years old, and if you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from." Let me give this some context first. I need your likes and comments to know you're following along with my story. How did I get here? 3 years ago, I'd sold my beautiful ranch-style home in Clearwater, the one my late wife Melody and I had built together during my construction foreman days. We'd poured our hearts into that place. I'd hand-selected every beam, supervised every pour of concrete, and Melody had designed the kitchen where we'd shared 20 years of morning coffee and evening conversations. After her cancer took her, that house felt too big, too quiet, too full of memories. So I sold it and gave Preston and Scarlett the down payment for their dream house, $85,000. My entire life savings handed over with a father's unconditional love. They'd promised I'd always have a place there, always be part of their family. In the Navy, we had a saying, "Actions speak louder than words." Well, their actions over the past 3 years had been speaking plenty loud. Now, the day before their elaborate wedding that I was financing, Scarlett decided I was disposable. "You heard her?" Preston said finally, his voice cold as a February morning on the deck of a destroyer. "This is supposed to be our special weekend. Your negativity is ruining everything." My negativity? I'd spent the morning arranging flowers, using the same careful precision I'd learned arranging deck equipment during my 12 years in the Navy. I'd spent the afternoon helping with last-minute preparations, drawing on the organizational skills that had made me a successful construction foreman for 25 years. And I'd spent the evening listening to Scarlett complain about everything from the weather to the caterer, biting my tongue when every instinct told me to give her the kind of straight talk that would have straightened out any sailor or construction worker under my command. The only negative thing I'd done was suggest maybe we didn't need ice sculptures shaped like dolphins. As a man who'd learned to cut through BS in both military service and blue-collar work, I've always focused on what matters. But apparently, expressing practical concerns about unnecessary expenses made me the bad guy. "Where exactly am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice eerily calm, the same tone I'd used during storm watches in the North Atlantic. Scarlett shrugged, examining her manicured nails like she was studying battle plans. "I don't know. A hotel? Your VFW buddies? One of those fishing trips you're always talking about? Honestly, Spencer, I don't care where you go as long as you're not here tomorrow." That stung. Those fishing trips she mentioned with such disdain? They were my sanctuary, the place where I'd found peace after Melody's death. My VFW brothers understood what it meant to serve, to sacrifice, to put others before yourself. They'd been checking on me regularly since Melody passed, inviting me to barbecues, including me in their poker nights. Real friendship, not the conditional relationship I apparently had with my own family. "This is my son's house too," I reminded her, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest that came whenever I had to defend my right to exist in their lives. "Actually," Preston cleared his throat, avoiding my eyes like a recruit who'd screwed up inspection, "it's more Scarlett's house now. She's been handling all the finances, making the improvements. You just gave us some money once." Some money once. $85,000. More than I'd made in my best year as a construction foreman, reduced to some money once. I stood there in the kitchen where I'd cooked countless Sunday dinners, looking at the granite countertops I'd helped choose using my knowledge of quality stone from years of construction work, the custom cabinets my money had made possible. These people had taken everything I'd given them and convinced themselves they deserved it. That's when something inside me shifted. Not broke, shifted, like a gear clicking into a different position. In the Navy, we called it tactical assessment. Time to evaluate the battlefield and determine the best course of action. During my construction days, it was what you did when a project went sideways and you needed to salvage what you could. "You're right," I said softly, drawing on the discipline that had kept me calm during rough seas and difficult job sites. "I should go." Scarlett looked surprised. She'd probably expected anger, pleading, the usual dramatic scene she could later describe to her country club friends as Spencer being difficult again. In her world, problems got solved by throwing money at them or having Daddy make phone calls. She had no idea how men like me handled real adversity. "I'll pack my things and be gone within the hour." Preston actually looked relieved, like a weight had been lifted off his shoulders. "That's probably for the best, Dad. We can talk after the honeymoon once things settle down." Talk after the honeymoon. As if this was just a temporary disagreement about wedding seating arrangements, not a fundamental breakdown of family respect and gratitude. I went upstairs to the guest room that had been my home for the past 6 months. Not my room. I wasn't allowed to call it that. Always the guest room because guests eventually leave, and Scarlett wanted to make sure I understood my temporary status in their lives. As I folded my clothes into my old Navy duffel bag, the same one I'd carried aboard 3 different ships during my 12 years of service, I could hear them downstairs already planning how to rearrange the space. Scarlett wanted to turn it into a yoga studio. Preston thought it would make a good office. Neither of them considered that maybe, just maybe, they should feel some guilt about throwing out the man who'd made their perfect life possible. The irony wasn't lost on me. Here I was, packing again just like I had dozens of times during my military career. But back then, I was moving towards something. A new assignment, a new challenge, a chance to serve my country. Now I was being exiled from my own family. I paused at Melody's photograph on the nightstand, the one I'd carried with me since her funeral 2 years ago. It showed her in our kitchen, flour in her hair, laughing at something I'd said while she baked one of her famous apple pies. 20 years of marriage, and she'd never once made me feel unwanted in my own home. We'd built our life together with the same careful planning I'd learned in the Navy and the same solid foundation I'd perfected in construction. "Don't worry, sweetheart," I whispered to her image. "I'm not going down without a fight." But first, I had reconnaissance to conduct and strategies to plan. Sitting in my F-150 outside their house, no, scratch that, outside the house my $85,000 had bought, I pulled out my phone and dialed my lawyer's emergency number. Brooke Maxwell had been handling my affairs since Melody's death, and she'd warned me about this exact scenario. As a former construction foreman, I'd learned the value of good legal counsel, especially when dealing with contracts and property issues. "Spencer, it's Saturday evening. Is everything all right? Brooke, I need you to pull the documentation on the house purchase. All of it. Every form, every signature, every piece of paper we filed." A pause. Has something happened with Preston and Scarlett? I told her everything, using the same clear, factual reporting style that had served me well during Navy debriefings and construction project meetings. Scarlett's ultimatum, Preston's betrayal, the casual way they dismissed my contribution as some money once. I kept my emotions in check, sticking to the facts. Brooke listened without interruption, though I could hear her typing furiously. "Spencer, I've been worried about this for months. The way they've been treating your investment as a gift rather than what it actually was." "What do you mean, what it actually was?" Another pause, longer this time. "You don't remember signing those additional documents? The ones I insisted on after you expressed concerns about Scarlett's spending habits?" My heart started beating faster, the way it had during general quarters aboard ship when we'd prepare for potential combat. "Brooke, please tell me you protected me somehow." "Oh, Spencer, the $85,000 wasn't a gift. Legally, it was a loan with your name on the deed as co-owner. Scarlett never signed the acknowledgement forms I sent over. In the eyes of the law, you own 30% of that house." I nearly dropped the phone. In all my years of construction work, I'd seen plenty of property disputes, but I'd never imagined I'd be in one with my own family. "Are you serious?" "Dead serious. Scarlett kept forgetting to sign the paperwork, and you were so focused on keeping peace in the family that you never pressed the issue. But the mortgage company has you listed as a co-borrower. The deed shows your ownership stake. It's all completely legal and binding." Through the kitchen window, I could see Scarlett showing off her wedding dress to someone on video chat, probably her mother. She was laughing, gesticulating wildly, completely oblivious to the conversation that was about to change her life. It reminded me of young sailors who thought they knew everything about seamanship until they hit their first real storm. "Brooke, hypothetically speaking, what would happen if I wanted to sell my share of the house?" "Well, as a co-owner, you'd have every right to force a sale." The other owners would have first right of refusal, of course. They could buy you out at current market value. And if they couldn't afford to buy me out, then the house goes on the market and the proceeds are split according to ownership percentages. I watched Preston appear in the kitchen window, opening a bottle of champagne, celebrating their freedom from the burdensome father, no doubt. The kid had no idea that his old man had been through enough real battles to recognize when it was time to deploy the heavy artillery. "Brooke, I need you to prepare a notice of intent to sell. I want it delivered first thing Monday morning. Spencer, are you sure about this? Once we start this process, I've never been more sure of anything in my life. They want me to disappear? Fine. But I'm taking my 30% with me." After hanging up with Brooke, I sat in the growing darkness, watching my son and his fiancée toast their future in the house I'd made possible. They had no idea that in less than 48 hours, their perfect little world was going to crumble like a poorly engineered foundation. But first, I had one more strategic strike to execute. Bay Harbor Country Club, this is Paige. Hi, Paige. This is Spencer Garrett. I need to speak with your catering manager about tomorrow's wedding reception. Oh, Mr. Garrett, how exciting. The wedding's tomorrow, isn't it? How can I help you? I'm afraid there's been a change of plans. I need to cancel the reception. The silence on the other end reminded me of the dead air we'd sometimes get during radio communications at sea when something had gone seriously wrong. Cancel? But, sir, it's less than 24 hours away. The food has been prepared, the staff scheduled, the flowers arranged. I understand completely, and I'm prepared to pay the cancellation fees. The thing is, I'm the one who signed the contract and put down the deposit. I believe I have the right to make changes. During my construction days, I'd learned that whoever signed the contract held the power. Basic business principle. A rustling of papers. Let me check. Yes, the contract is under your name with your credit card information. But surely you want to speak with the bride and groom first? No need. I'm making an executive decision. Please cancel everything. Mr. Garrett, with respect, this seems like something that should involve the happy couple. I watched Scarlett through the window, now trying on her veil for what had to be the 100th time today. She moved with the entitled confidence of someone who'd never had to worry about consequences, never had to earn respect through years of hard work and sacrifice. The happy couple made it very clear that my involvement in their lives is no longer welcome. So, I'm simply honoring their wishes by removing my financial support from their celebration. 20 minutes later, I was checking into the guest quarters at Sunset Palms Retirement Community, where my VFW buddy, Charlie Rodriguez, had been living since his wife passed. The place had a military-friendly atmosphere, clean, organized, with staff who understood the value of respect and straightforward communication. After 3 years of walking on eggshells around Scarlett's moods and Preston's avoidance, it felt like coming home to base. I ordered room service, a decent steak dinner, nothing fancy, and felt something I hadn't experienced in years, the satisfaction of taking control of my own life. For too long, I'd been letting other people dictate my living situation, my financial decisions, even my daily routine. Tonight, I was calling the shots again. My phone started ringing at 11:47 p.m., The caller ID showed Preston's number, but Scarlett's voice screeched through the phone so loudly I had to hold it away from my ear. "What did you do?" "I honored your request," I said calmly, using the same measured tone I'd perfected during tense moments on ship. "You wanted me to disappear, so I disappeared. The country club called. They said you canceled our reception." "Our wedding reception, Spencer. There are 200 people expecting dinner tomorrow." "I'm sure there are." That does sound like a problem. I kept my voice level, professional. In the military, we'd learned that staying calm during a crisis often made the other party reveal more than they intended. Preston grabbed the phone, his voice cracking like a teenager's. "Dad, this is insane. You can't just cancel our wedding because you're upset about sleeping arrangements. I didn't cancel your wedding, son. You can still get married. I just canceled the reception I was paying for. You know, the one that was costing me $12,000. The silence that followed was deafening. I'd never mentioned the cost before, always deflecting when they asked about money. I'd wanted to be the generous father, letting them remain blissfully unaware of the sacrifices involved. But that approach had clearly backfired. $12,000? Scarlett's voice was faint now, like she was speaking from underwater. The reception, the flowers, the photographer, the band, the ice sculptures. Did you think it was all free? Did you think money just materialized because you two decided to have a fairy tale wedding? During my construction years, I'd seen plenty of clients who had champagne tastes on a beer budget. The smart ones adjusted their expectations. The foolish ones went into debt trying to maintain appearances. Preston and Scarlett had been living in the latter category for years, subsidized by my generosity. But we can't tell 200 people there's no reception, Preston stammered. You're resourceful adults. I'm sure you'll figure something out. McDonald's caters now, I hear. Scarlett was crying now, ugly sobbing sounds that might have made me feel guilty 6 months ago. But I'd learned something important during my years in the service and later in construction. Sometimes you have to let people face the natural consequences of their actions. That's how they learn to make better decisions. How could you do this to us? We trusted you. Trusted me? You literally told me to disappear from your family. I didn't mean forever, Scarlett wailed through the phone. I just meant for the weekend. Ah, I see. So I was supposed to psychically understand that when you said disappear from our family permanently, you actually meant temporarily. My mistake. I settled back in the comfortable chair, muting the TV to focus completely on this conversation. After years of tiptoeing around their sensitivities, it felt liberating to speak plainly. Preston tried a different approach, his voice taking on that wheedling tone he'd used as a kid when he wanted something. Dad, please, we can talk about this like adults. Come back to the house and let's work this out. The house where I'm no longer welcome? The house where my presence ruins everything? I don't think so. I'd learned during my Navy years that once you established a defensive position, you didn't abandon it without good reason. Where are you even staying? Scarlett demanded, her voice sharp with panic. That's not really your concern anymore, is it? You made it quite clear that my living arrangements are my problem to solve. I could hear frantic whispering in the background, probably them trying to figure out how to undo the mess they'd created. It reminded me of construction crews who'd ignored safety protocols and then scrambled to fix problems after an inspector showed up. Can you at least call the country club back? Preston pleaded. Maybe if you explain it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a very clear business decision made by the person who was paying for everything. But what about our guests? What about Scarlett's family flying in from California? What about them? You're still getting married. They can still witness that. They just won't get a free dinner afterward. During my construction days, I'd seen plenty of projects where the client wanted premium features but didn't want to pay premium prices. Reality always won those negotiations. Scarlett grabbed the phone back. You're being vindictive and cruel. No, sweetie. Vindictive and cruel was telling the man who's been supporting your dream wedding to disappear from your family. I'm just being fiscally responsible. This will ruin everything. Everyone will think we're broke. Well, now that you mention it. I let that hang in the air for a moment, watching them squirm like recruits who just realized they were in serious trouble. Now that you mention it, without my financial support, you probably are going to be broke pretty soon. That's another thing we should discuss. What do you mean? Preston's voice was tight with panic now. I mean, have you actually looked at your household budget lately? Do you know how much your monthly expenses are versus your income? More frantic whispering. I could practically hear the wheels turning as they tried to calculate numbers they'd never bothered to track properly. Because I've been supplementing your lifestyle in ways you probably haven't even noticed. The grocery money I slip to Scarlett when we go shopping together, the utility bills I pay online because you're always a little short this month, the car repairs, the insurance payments, the little emergencies that keep popping up. The truth was, I'd been keeping detailed records of every financial contribution for the past 3 years. Old habits from my construction foreman days. Always document everything, because people's memories get conveniently fuzzy when money's involved. I had spreadsheets showing every check I'd written, every bill I'd paid, every emergency loan I'd provided. Those were gifts, Scarlett said weakly. Were they? Because from where I'm sitting, they look more like an allowance, and allowances can be discontinued at any time. During my military service, I'd learned that logistics win wars. You can have the best sailors and the finest equipment, but if you can't sustain them with supplies, you'll lose. Preston and Scarlett had been living beyond their means for years, sustained by my financial logistics. Without that support, their lifestyle was unsustainable. The silence stretched so long I thought they'd hung up. Finally, Preston spoke, his voice small and defeated. "What do you want, Dad?" Now that was interesting. An hour ago, they couldn't wait to get rid of me. Now they wanted to negotiate. It reminded me of contractors who'd initially dismissed my concerns about structural problems, then came back begging for my expertise when the building inspector flagged their work. "I want exactly what you offered me, to disappear from your family permanently. And I want to take my money with me when I go." The intake of breath on the other end was audible. They were finally beginning to understand the scope of their mistake. "Dad, you can't be serious." "I'm completely serious, Preston. You wanted me gone? Consider it done. But I'm not leaving empty-handed. Every dollar I've invested in your lifestyle, every contribution I've made to your comfort, I want it back. That's impossible. We don't have that kind of money." "Then you'd better figure out how to get it or start looking for a cheaper place to live." I hung up and sat back in my chair, feeling more satisfaction than I had in months. By Sunday morning, my phone had 37 missed calls and 41 text messages. I ignored them all while enjoying room service breakfast and reading the Sunday paper like a civilized person. The Tampa Bay Times had a nice article about local veterans programs, something I'd been considering getting involved with now that I had more time on my hands. The wedding was scheduled for 2 p.m. At 9:00 a.m., there was a knock on my door. Through the peephole, I saw Preston in his wrinkled tuxedo shirt, looking like he'd been through a Category 5 hurricane. His hair was disheveled, his eyes bloodshot, and he had the desperate look of a man who'd finally realized he was in over his head. "Dad, please, we need to talk." I opened the door but didn't invite him in, using the same tactical positioning I'd learned during port inspections. Control the entry point, maintain the advantage. "Shouldn't you be getting ready for your big day?" "That's what I need to talk to you about." His eyes were red-rimmed, desperate. "Scarlett's having a complete breakdown. She's locked herself in the bathroom and won't come out. Her mother is threatening to fly back to California without attending the ceremony. The whole thing is falling apart. I'm sorry to hear that. I hope you work it out." I kept my tone neutral, professional, the same voice I'd used when reviewing construction projects that were behind schedule and over budget. "Work it out? Dad, you destroyed our wedding." "No, son. I removed my financial support from your wedding. There's a difference." He pushed past me into the room, and I let him. Sometimes you have to let people hang themselves with their own words. During my years as a foreman, I'd learned that the best way to handle an angry worker was to let them vent until they ran out of steam. This is insane. Over what? A misunderstanding about sleeping arrangements? "Sit down, Preston." Something in my tone, probably the same command voice I'd used with green sailors and rookie construction workers, made him obey immediately. I remained standing, looking down at my 42-year-old son, who was finally starting to understand that actions have consequences. This isn't about sleeping arrangements. This is about respect. This is about gratitude. This is about treating the man who made your lifestyle possible like a human being instead of an inconvenience. We've always treated you well. Have you? I leaned against the dresser, crossing my arms in a posture that had made many a subordinate think twice about their answer. When was the last time you asked about my life, my interests, my feelings? When was the last time you invited me somewhere because you wanted my company, not because you needed my help or my money? He opened his mouth, then closed it, looking like a fish gasping for air. "I'll wait." The silence stretched uncomfortably. "When was the last time you called just to talk? When was the last time you remembered my birthday without Facebook reminding you? When was the last time you treated me like your father instead of your personal bank? That's not fair. Isn't it, Preston? In the past year alone, how much money have I given you and Scarlett? I don't know. A few thousand here and there for emergencies." Try again. I pulled out my phone and opened the financial tracking app I'd been using. "Want me to read you the itemized list?" His face went pale. "Dad, $32,000. His face went white as naval dress uniform. $32,000 in emergencies and little helps and just until we get back on our feet, on top of the $85,000 for the house down payment. That's $117,000, Preston. More than most people make in 2 years. Preston stared at me like I'd just told him the earth was flat. We were always planning to pay you back. Were you? because Scarlett's been shopping for a new BMW. You've been looking at vacation packages to Europe for your honeymoon extension. Neither of you has mentioned paying me back even once." He slumped forward, head in his hands like a defeated soldier. "What do you want from me, Dad? I want you to understand that I'm not your personal ATM. I want you to understand that kindness and generosity aren't infinite resources. And I want you to understand that when you treat someone badly enough for long enough, eventually they stop caring about your problems. So you're punishing us by ruining our wedding day?" The casual cruelty in that statement, that my setting boundaries was punishment, confirmed everything I'd been feeling. It was like being told that expecting basic respect was somehow unreasonable. "No, Preston. I'm protecting myself by stopping the pattern of financial abuse." "Financial abuse? That's ridiculous, is it? You've conditioned me to believe that my only value to your family is monetary. You've trained me to expect crumbs of affection in exchange for major financial contributions." I sat down across from him, leaning forward so he had to look at me. "Yesterday, Scarlett told me the best gift I could give your family was to disappear permanently. And you agreed with her. She didn't mean it. Yes, she did, and so did you. And you know what? You're going to get exactly what you asked for." He looked up sharply, alarm bells clearly going off in his head. "What does that mean?" I smiled, and it wasn't a nice smile. It was the kind of expression I'd worn when delivering bad news to contractors who'd tried to cut corners on structural integrity. "It means you'd better figure out how to pay for your own lifestyle from now on. It means you'd better hope Scarlett's parents are feeling generous. And it means you'd better start looking at apartments because the house situation is about to get very complicated." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the legal documents you never bothered to read before I helped you with that down payment. The ones that make me a co-owner of your precious house." The color drained from his face completely, like someone had opened a valve and let all the blood out. During my construction days, I'd seen that same look when building inspectors delivered news that meant tearing down weeks of work. "That's right, son. I own 30% of your house, and I'm about to put it on the market." Preston stared at me like I'd just spoken in ancient Greek. "You can't own part of our house. We bought it. We live there. With my $85,000 down payment." "Yes." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to Brooke's email from the night before. "Did you think that money just evaporated into thin air? But you said it was a gift. You said you wanted to help us get started. Apparently my lawyer had different ideas about protecting my investment. Would you like me to read you the relevant legal documents?" I held up the phone, enjoying the way his eyes widened as he realized the implications. "This is impossible." Scarlett would have had to sign something. Scarlett was supposed to sign something. She kept forgetting to return the papers. Brooke kept them on file anyway, and the mortgage company processed everything with me as co-borrower. Preston was shaking now, either from anger or fear. His hands trembled as he ran them through his hair. "You planned this. You've been planning this whole thing." "Oh, son." I leaned back, genuinely amused by his accusation. "If I'd been planning this, don't you think I would have done it before paying for your wedding?" The truth of that seemed to hit him like a sledgehammer. I'd spent $12,000 on a wedding for people who'd just told me to disappear. If I'd been scheming, I would have pulled the plug months ago. "So what happens now?" His voice was small, defeated. The voice of a man who'd just realized he'd been outmaneuvered by someone he'd underestimated. "Now you have a choice. You can buy out my 30% share at current market value, or we can sell the house and split the proceeds. We can't afford to buy you out. The house is worth $285,000 now. 30% of that is over $85,000. I know. I'm good at math. That's why I have money. And you two are always broke." He flinched like I'd slapped him. We're not broke. We just have a lot of expenses." "Preston, your combined household income is $7,500 a month. Your mortgage payment alone is $1,600. Add in car payments, credit cards, utilities, groceries, and Scarlett's shopping habit, and you're spending more than you make every single month. How do you know all that? Because I've been making up the difference for the past 3 years. Do you think the money fairy was leaving cash under your pillow?" The hotel phone rang, cutting through the tension in the room. I answered it while Preston sat there processing his new reality, looking like a man who'd just discovered his parachute had holes in it. "Mr. Garrett, this is Paige from Bay Harbor Country Club. I have the bride's mother on another line. She's asking about reinstating today's reception. She says she'll pay all the costs if you'll allow us to proceed. I looked at Preston, who was listening with desperate hope in his eyes, like a drowning man reaching for a life preserver. That's very generous of her, Paige, but I'm afraid that won't be possible. Dad, please, Preston started. I held up a hand to silence him, the same gesture that had stopped countless arguments on construction sites. You see, Paige, there are some family dynamics at play here that make it inappropriate for me to accept payment from other family members for an event I chose to cancel. I understand. Should I tell Mrs. Parker that the cancellation stands? Yes, please. And Paige, send my final bill to this address. I'll settle up everything I owe for the inconvenience. After hanging up, I turned back to Preston, who looked like he'd been gut-punched. Scarlett's mother was willing to pay $12,000 to save your reception. She's been planning this wedding for months. She invited half her country club. This is going to humiliate her in front of all her friends. How nice for her. Too bad her daughter couldn't manage to be civil to the person who was originally paying for everything. Preston pulled out his phone, his hands still trembling. I need to call Scarlett. We need to figure out what to do about the house. Go ahead. But Preston? I stood up, straightening to my full height, a posture that had commanded respect on ship decks and construction sites for decades. When you talk to your wife about our new arrangement, make sure she understands something. He looked up from dialing, his face pale and drawn. I'm not the same man who walked out of your house last night. That man was desperate to keep peace in the family at any cost. This man is done being taken advantage of. You're really going to force us to sell our home? I'm going to exercise my legal rights as a co-owner. What you do with that information is up to you. He left without another word, probably to deliver the worst news of Scarlett's life on what was supposed to be the happiest day. I watched him walk across the parking lot toward his car, shoulders slumped like a defeated soldier returning from battle. Part of me felt sorry for him, but a larger part remembered that he'd made his choice when he agreed with Scarlett's demand that I disappear. 20 minutes later, my phone rang again. This time, it was Scarlett, her voice barely recognizable through her tears. Spencer, we need to talk. No, sweetie, we really don't. You made it very clear yesterday that talking to me wasn't something you were interested in doing. I was upset. I was stressed about the wedding. I didn't mean what I said. Of course you were upset. It must be exhausting pretending to tolerate someone you obviously despise. I settled back in my chair, prepared for what I knew would be a long conversation filled with tears, manipulation, and false promises. I don't despise you. Spencer, I know I haven't been appreciative enough, but we're family. Interesting. In the 3 years since you moved into the house I bought for you, you've never once thanked me. Not once. You've never asked about my life, my interests, my health. You've never invited me to anything unless you needed me to babysit or bring food or write a check. That's not true. When was the last time you called just to see how I was doing? Silence. Dead air that stretched for so long I thought she'd hung up. I'll save you the mental effort. Never. You've never called just to check on me. But yesterday you told me the best gift I could give this family was to disappear permanently. Today you're claiming I'm family. Which is it, Scarlett? More crying. The kind of desperate sobbing that once would have made me rush over with tissues and comfort. Now it just sounded like the tantrum of someone who'd finally been held accountable for their actions. Spencer, please, I'll do anything. I'll apologize publicly. I'll pay you back. I almost laughed. Pay me back with what money? You don't work, remember? You're a full-time homemaker in a house you couldn't afford without my money. I'll get a job. That's a great idea. You should definitely do that. But it doesn't change the current situation with the house. What if we agree to pay you back for everything? All the money you've given us over the years? Scarlett, honey, you owe me $117,000. At minimum wage, working full-time, it would take you about 4 years to earn that much. And that's assuming you never spend money on anything else. No food, no gas, no clothing, nothing. The silence that followed was the sound of reality finally sinking in. By 4 p.m., they'd called 16 more times. I'd answered exactly none of them. Instead, I was sitting in the Sunset Palms restaurant enjoying a late lunch with Charlie Rodriguez, my old VFW buddy who'd been keeping me company and offering moral support. Charlie had been through his own family drama when his daughter tried to manipulate him after his wife's death, so he understood the dynamics better than most. "You're doing the right thing," Charlie said, cutting into his grilled fish. "Sometimes you got to let people fall on their face to learn how to stand up properly." We were watching the local news coverage of what they were calling a wedding reception crisis at Bay Harbor Country Club. The reporter didn't mention names, but the footage of Scarlett in her wedding dress crying on the country club steps was pretty unmistakable. "Excuse me, aren't you Spencer Garrett?" I looked up to see a woman about my age with perfectly styled gray hair and intelligent eyes. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her immediately. "I'm sorry. Do we know each other?" Natalie Parker, Scarlett's mother. She gestured to the empty chair at our table. "May I join you, gentlemen?" This was unexpected. Charlie raised an eyebrow but made room for her to sit down. "I wanted to thank you," Natalie said, settling into her chair with practiced grace. "Thank me?" That definitely wasn't what I'd expected from the mother of the bride whose reception I'd just canceled. "For showing my daughter who she really is." The waitress appeared and Natalie ordered coffee. "I've been worried about Scarlett for years. The entitlement, the way she treats people she considers beneath her, the complete lack of gratitude for anything." Charlie leaned back in his chair, clearly enjoying this unexpected development. "I've seen how she treats you, Spencer," Natalie continued, "and I'm horrified. I raised her better than that, or at least I thought I did." "Your daughter is having the worst day of her life," I pointed out. "Good. Maybe it will teach her some humility." Natalie's coffee arrived. I offered to pay for the reception, not because I support Scarlett's behavior, but because I felt responsible for the 200 guests. "But you were right to refuse." Was I? My daughter needed to face real consequences for her actions, the kind that can't be fixed with daddy's money or mommy's connections. As we sat there talking, my phone rang. The number wasn't one I recognized. "Mr. Garrett? This is Detective Hunter with the Tampa Bay Police Department. I'm calling about a report we received regarding financial elder abuse." My blood went cold. Charlie and Natalie both leaned forward, sensing the change in my demeanor. "I'm sorry." "What?" "We had a call from someone claiming that family members have been financially exploiting you and that you might be experiencing cognitive decline. They're requesting a welfare check, those manipulative little snakes. They'd actually called the police on me." "Detective Hunter, I can assure you that I'm in full possession of my mental faculties. In fact, I'm probably thinking more clearly than I have in years." "That's good to hear, sir, but we do need to follow up on these reports. Would you be available to meet with me tomorrow morning?" I looked around the restaurant at Charlie and Natalie, feeling a surge of pure fury at my son and daughter-in-law's latest manipulation tactic. "Absolutely, Detective. In fact, I have quite a lot I'd like to discuss with you about financial abuse, just not the kind my family reported." After scheduling the meeting for Monday morning, I sat back in my chair and actually smiled. If Preston and Scarlett wanted to play hardball, I was more than ready to pick up the bat. Time to show them what a real power play looked like. Charlie whistled low. "They called the cops on you? That's cold, even for family." "It's desperation," Natalie said, shaking her head. "When Scarlett can't get her way through tears or manipulation, she escalates. Her father always bailed her out when she pulled stunts like this." "Well, I'm not her father," I replied, "and I've dealt with tougher situations than this." Monday morning came crisp and clear. Detective Hunter was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with intelligent eyes and the kind of patient demeanor that probably served him well in family disputes. We met at the police station, and I'd brought my entire financial documentation, organized in a 3-ring binder with tabbed sections, the same way I'd maintained project files during my construction days. "Mr. Garrett, I want to start by saying that the person who called us seemed genuinely concerned about your welfare. I'm sure they did. My daughter-in-law is very good at sounding concerned when it suits her purposes." I opened my binder and spread bank statements across his desk. "Detective, in the past 3 years, I've given my son and his wife $117,000. Would you like to see the documentation?" His eyebrows rose as he examined the papers. Check after check, wire transfers, credit card payments made on their behalf. A clear pattern of financial dependency that looked exactly like what it was. "This is substantial," he said carefully. "It is. And yesterday, when I finally set some boundaries about how they treat me, They decided I must be mentally incompetent. I pulled out my phone and played the voicemail Scarlett had left at 3:00 a.m. Spencer, this is insane behavior. Normal people don't destroy their families' lives over hurt feelings. We're worried about you. Maybe you need to see someone, get some help. Preston thinks you might be having some kind of breakdown. Detective Hunter listened, taking notes with the methodical attention I recognized from my own military training. Has there been any history of cognitive issues, Mr. Garrett? None whatsoever. I manage my own finances, maintain my own household, drive myself places. I'm an active member of the VFW, participate in community activities here at Sunset Palms, and I even volunteer with habitat restoration projects through the County Veterans Program. I showed him the house documents Brooke had emailed over. My lawyer can verify that I'm a legal co-owner of their property. Everything I'm doing is within my rights as an investor protecting my assets. And the wedding cancellation? I was paying for a reception for people who told me to disappear from their family permanently. So I honored their request. Can you walk me through what led to this conflict? I took him through the timeline methodically, using the same clear reporting style that had served me well in Navy briefings and construction project meetings, the years of financial support, the gradual erosion of respect, the increasing demands, and finally Scarlett's ultimatum. So you see, Detective, the real question isn't whether I'm competent to manage my finances. It's whether a pattern of emotional manipulation designed to extract money from an elderly person constitutes financial abuse. Detective Hunter leaned back in his chair, studying the documentation. You mentioned they've been living beyond their means. Their combined income is $7,500 a month. Their fixed expenses alone, mortgage, car payments, insurance, utilities, total about $4,200. That leaves $300 for everything else: food, gas, clothing, entertainment. But they've been spending closer to $8,500 a month, with me making up the $1,000 difference through various emergencies and temporary helps. I pulled out another set of documents. Here are examples. $800 for car repairs that turned out to be routine maintenance they should have budgeted for. $200 for a medical emergency that was actually Scarlett's elective dental work. $2,000 for temporary help with Christmas expenses. None of it ever repaid, all of it framed as urgent needs. And you documented all of this? Old habits from construction work. When money changes hands, you document everything. I showed him my spreadsheet. Every contribution categorized and tracked. Gifts, loans, emergency assistance, bill payments made on their behalf. The pattern is clear once you see it laid out. Detective Hunter was quiet for a long moment, reviewing the evidence. Mr. Garrett, I have to say, this is some of the most organized financial documentation I've seen in a family dispute case. 25 years as a construction foreman teaches you to keep good records. When you're dealing with budgets and contracts worth hundreds of thousands of dollars, attention to detail isn't optional. What's your end game here? Are you seeking restitution? I'm seeking respect. And I'm protecting what's left of my retirement security. I leaned forward. Detective, I'm 63 years old. I lost my wife to cancer 2 years ago. I've got maybe 15 good years left, and I'll be damned if I'm going to spend them being treated like a human ATM by people who view my existence as an inconvenience. We talked for another 20 minutes. Detective Hunter was thorough but fair, asking pointed questions about my mental state, my decision-making process, and my understanding of the consequences of my actions. Mr. Garrett, I'm going to close this case as unfounded, he said finally. Based on our conversation and the documentation you've provided, I see no evidence of cognitive decline or impaired judgment. In fact, your actions appear to be those of someone making rational decisions to protect himself from financial exploitation. He handed me a business card. I'm going to give you some information about elder financial abuse resources, just in case you need additional support. But I want you to know that what you've described, family members conditioning you to provide financial support through emotional manipulation, that's a recognized form of abuse. As I drove away from the police station in my F-150, my phone rang. Preston again. Dad, the police called. They said they're not pursuing the welfare check. That's because I'm not the one being financially abused in this relationship, son. What's that supposed to mean? It means you and Scarlett have been systematically draining my resources for years while giving me nothing but disrespect in return. The detective was very interested in my documentation. A long pause. I could practically hear the wheels turning as Preston tried to process this new reality. Are you threatening us? I'm informing you that your manipulation tactics aren't working anymore. Dad, please, can we just sit down and talk about this like adults? We can, but not at the house I co-own. And not until Scarlett apologizes for her behavior. A real apology, not the panicked damage control she tried yesterday. She's sorry. She's been crying for 3 days. Has she? Because the voicemail she left me at 3 this morning suggested she thinks I'm mentally ill, not that she's sorry. Another pause. Where do you want to meet? Brooke Maxwell's office, tomorrow at 2 p.m. Bring Scarlett and bring a realistic proposal for how you're going to handle the house situation. A proposal? Preston, I own 30% of an asset worth $285,000. That's $85,500 of my retirement security sitting in your driveway. You either buy me out or we sell. Those are your options. After hanging up, I realized something fundamental had shifted in our dynamic. For the first time in years, they needed something from me more than I needed something from them. It reminded me of construction negotiations where the contractor suddenly realized they needed your expertise more than you needed their business. Brooke's law office felt like neutral territory the next afternoon, all dark wood and leather-bound books that spoke of order and consequence. Preston and Scarlett arrived 15 minutes late, looking like they'd been arguing in the car. Scarlett's eyes were puffy and red, her usual polish completely gone. She'd traded her designer outfits for a simple dress that actually looked modest and appropriate. Spencer, Scarlett started immediately, I owe you an enormous apology. I was stressed and overwhelmed, and I said things I didn't mean. Thank you. That's a start. She looked surprised, like she'd expected me to immediately forgive everything and return to the status quo. Brooke spread the house documents across the conference table with practiced efficiency. Let's review the facts. Spencer provided $85,000 for the down payment. The mortgage shows him as a co-borrower. The deed lists his ownership at 30%. Preston studied the papers like they might magically change if he stared hard enough. We had no idea about the ownership stake. You would have if Scarlett had signed the acknowledgement forms, Brooke replied with professional directness. I sent them 3 times over 2 years. I was busy with wedding planning, Scarlett said weakly. For 3 years? Brooke's tone was beautifully skeptical. I let them squirm for a moment before speaking. The question now is how we move forward. I have a proposal. They both leaned forward with the desperate hope of people who'd just realized they were drowning. Option 1, you buy out my 30% share at current market value, $85,500. Scarlett's face went white as fresh paint. We don't have that kind of money. Option 2, we put the house on the market and split the proceeds according to ownership percentages. We'd have to move, Preston said quietly. Yes, you would. To something you can actually afford based on your real income. What about option 3? Scarlett asked desperately. There is no option 3. Those are your choices. Brooke pulled out a calculator. If you sold the house today after realtor fees and closing costs, you'd probably net around $265,000. Spencer's share would be about $79,500. You'd have $185,500 to find new housing. That's not enough for anything decent, Scarlett protested. It's enough for a nice apartment or a smaller house in a different neighborhood, I replied calmly. You know, the kind of place people with your actual income should be living. Preston ran his hands through his hair, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Dad, is there any way we can work out a payment plan? Maybe we could pay you monthly until we've bought out your share? I'd been waiting for this question. At what interest rate and with what collateral? You've already proven you don't honor financial agreements. That's not fair, isn't it? You owe me $32,000 in emergency loans that you never intended to repay. Why would I trust you with another $85,500? Scarlett started crying again, but these tears seemed different, less manipulative, more genuinely distressed. This is going to destroy our lives. No, Scarlett, this is going to force you to live within your means for the first time in your adult life. But what about our credit? What about our reputation? I almost laughed. Your credit? Honey, your credit is already terrible. You've been late on every bill for months. I know because I've been bailing you out. Brooke cleared her throat. I need to advise you that Spencer has every legal right to force a sale. He's being more than generous by offering these options. How long do we have to decide? Preston asked. 30 days, I said. That should give you time to explore your financing options. As we prepared to leave, Scarlett grabbed my arm. Spencer, please. I know I hurt you, but we're family. Doesn't that count for something? I looked at her hand on my arm, then at her face. For just a moment, I saw past the entitled facade to the scared young woman underneath. Scarlett, family is supposed to count for something. That's exactly the point. 2 weeks into their 30-day deadline, I got an unexpected visitor. Natalie Parker stood at my door with a bottle of wine and a determined expression. I hope you don't mind me dropping by. I got your address from Brooke Maxwell. I invited her in, curious about what had brought Scarlett's mother back to Florida. I came to check on the kids, Natalie said, settling into my armchair, and to talk to you. How are they doing? Terribly. Scarlett's having daily panic attacks. Preston's working overtime trying to find a way to get a loan. They're fighting constantly. I poured us both glasses of wine, surprised to find I felt less satisfaction in their misery than I'd expected. Natalie, are you here to ask me to reconsider? Actually, no. I'm here to tell you about Scarlett's father. That wasn't what I'd expected. Richard spoiled our daughter rotten, Natalie continued, settling back with her wine. Every tantrum was rewarded, every consequence was cushioned, every failure was someone else's fault. She sipped her wine thoughtfully. When Scarlett was 16, she totaled her car driving drunk. Instead of letting her face the legal consequences, Richard hired the best lawyer money could buy and got the charges dropped. Why are you telling me this? Because I've watched my daughter become someone I don't recognize, and I finally understand that her problems aren't going to be solved by more money or more rescuing. Natalie reached into her purse and pulled out a check. Scarlett asked me to give you this. It's for $25,000. A good faith payment toward buying out your share. I looked at the check but didn't touch it. And what did you tell her? I told her I wouldn't be her enabler anymore. That check represents Richard's life insurance policy. Money I was saving for her inheritance. She tore the check in half, but I realized that giving it to her would just be repeating the same pattern. Natalie, that's a lot of money. Money Scarlett hasn't earned and doesn't deserve. Spencer, I want you to know that whatever you decide about the house, you have my support. Even if it means they lose their home, especially then. Maybe having to start over will teach Scarlett what work and gratitude actually mean. After Natalie left, I sat alone with my thoughts. For 3 years, I'd been Scarlett's enabler just as much as her parents had been. Every time I wrote a check to cover their shortfall, I'd been teaching them that there would always be someone to catch them when they fell. The question was, what kind of lesson did I want them to learn now? My phone buzzed with a text from Preston. Dad, we've been approved for a home equity loan that would cover $60,000 toward buying you out. Can we meet to discuss partial payment arrangements for the rest? I stared at the message for a long time. They were trying, which was more than they'd done in years, but a home equity loan meant going deeper into debt, not learning to live responsibly. I typed back, we can discuss it, but I want to see a complete household budget and a realistic plan for paying off all your debts, not just mine. His response came immediately. Anything you want, Dad. We just want to make this right. For the first time since this whole thing started, that sounded like progress. The budget meeting the following week was enlightening in the worst possible way. Preston and Scarlett spread their financial documents across Brooke's conference table like evidence at a court-martial. Okay, I said, reviewing their monthly expenses with the same attention to detail I'd brought to construction budgets. You spend $400 a month on restaurants. We both work long hours, Scarlett said defensively. Sometimes we're too tired to cook. You don't work at all, Scarlett. I moved down the list. $300 a month on clothing, $200 on premium cable and streaming services, $150 on gym memberships you use maybe twice a month, $800 a month in credit card minimums for what appears to be shopping and vacation debt. Preston was adding numbers on his phone calculator, his face growing paler with each calculation. But with the home equity loan, we could pay off the credit cards and reduce our monthly expenses significantly, Scarlett said hopefully. I looked at Brooke, who was taking notes with professional detachment. Scarlett, you'd be borrowing against the house to pay off credit card debt. What happens when you run up the credit cards again? We won't. We've learned our lesson. Have you? Because I don't see any significant changes in this budget. You're still planning to eat out constantly, still maintaining expensive memberships you barely use, still treating shopping like a recreational activity. Preston leaned forward. What would you want to see, Dad? What would convince you that we're serious about changing? Finally, the right question. I want to see a budget that reflects your actual income. I want to see you cooking at home, canceling unnecessary subscriptions, and Scarlett getting a job. A job? Scarlett looked horrified. Yes, a job. You're 39 years old with a college degree. There's no reason you can't contribute to the household income. But Preston makes good money. Not good enough, apparently, since you've been supplementing it with my money for 3 years. Brooke cleared her throat. Spencer, what exactly are you proposing? I'd been thinking about this for days, weighing military discipline against family forgiveness. Here's my offer. You can buy out my share for $70,000 instead of the full market value of $85,500. But there are conditions. They both perked up like recruits hearing about shore leave. First, Scarlett gets a job within 60 days and maintains it for at least 2 years. Second, you sell one of your cars and use the proceeds to pay down debt. Third, you stick to a realistic budget. No restaurant meals, no unnecessary shopping, and no new debt for 2 years. How would you monitor that? Preston asked. Monthly financial check-ins with Brooke. You provide bank statements, credit reports, and proof of income. If you violate any of the conditions, the full amount becomes due immediately. Scarlett was shaking her head. That's like being in financial prison. No, Scarlett. That's called being accountable for your choices. They asked for time to discuss it privately. When they returned, Preston spoke for both of them. We accept your terms. All of them. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new apartment, a comfortable 2-bedroom place in Sunset Palms with a pool and walking trails, when Scarlett called with surprising news. Spencer? I got the promotion! Scarlett had started working as a receptionist at a dental office, and apparently she'd been good enough at it to move up to office manager. That's wonderful, honey. How do you feel? Exhausted, she laughed, and it was the first genuine laugh I'd heard from her in years, but also proud. I never knew I was good at organizing things. You always were. You just never had to use those skills before. Spencer, would you like to come to dinner sometime? Nothing fancy, just homemade spaghetti and maybe some conversation that isn't about money. I thought about it. I'd like that. But let's start with lunch in a public place. Baby steps. Of course. Whatever you're comfortable with. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for someone is let them face the consequences of their choices. Sometimes love means saying no, and sometimes the best gift you can give someone is the opportunity to discover who they really are when no one's there to catch them. I'd spent 3 years being their safety net, and in doing so, I'd robbed them of the chance to develop their own strength. When I finally pulled that net away, they'd learned to fly. Not because they wanted to, but because they had to. At 63, I was finally learning what it felt like to be valued for who I was, not what I could provide. And that was worth more than all the money I'd ever given away. Thanks for listening, fellow veterans and fathers. Your voice matters.